The dark and disturbing history of the McCormick Ranch in Kit Carson, Colorado, is a chilling series of events in the mid-1980s involving the McCormick family, specifically Tom McCormick and his son, Michael. Locals in the rural community of Stratton have heard rumors about transient farmhands who would go to work at the McCormick Ranch and never be seen again. The mystery broke open in 1986 when Michael McCormick, facing charges for theft and fraud, offered a plea deal. He would lead investigators to bodies on the family property in exchange for leniency. Keeping his promise, Michael led police to the ranch, and they unearthed the remains of several men, including Bert Donoho, a truck driver who had vanished in 1983. The discovery led to a convoluted legal saga and a bitter family feud that left the true extent of the crimes unknown. Michael claimed his father, Tom, was a ruthless overlord who murdered the workers to avoid paying them or to silence them, forcing Michael to help bury the bodies. Tom denied the accusations, and Michael's credibility collapsed when he failed a polygraph test and gave inconsistent testimony. Without a reliable witness, prosecutors could not secure a murder conviction against Tom, who died a free man in 1997. The secrets of the ranch were likely buried for good in 2010 when Michael McCormick died, leaving the full story of the McCormick Murder Farm and the exact number of the victims forever unknown. This is the story of the secrets of the McCormick Ranch. Let's get spooky. Hey, spooky people, it's your best friend Kenny, and we are back with another spooky and disturbing story. Before we get to today's story, let's make sure that you are subscribed to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Let's make sure that you like, share, and comment on this video to help me in the algorithm, and hit the hype button. Thank you. In the early 1980s, the McCormick Ranch was the center of dark and persistent rumors. It was located in the remote, sparsely populated landscape of the Eastern Plains near Stratton, Colorado. The ranch was owned by Thomas McCormick Sr. and ran with the help of his two sons, Michael Rexford McCormick and John McCormick. The family had a local reputation for being mean and quick to anger. Their business model involved recruiting dozens of transient farmhands and homeless men from shelters and bars in Denver to work the remote property. It was from the vulnerable and transient population that the rumors of a murder farm emerged. For decades, it was said that men would be taken to McCormick Ranch for work and would never be seen again. Later, law enforcement reports and news articles would state that Tom Sr. and his son Michael were suspected in the deaths of as many as 17 homeless men. The remote, isolated nature of the ranch, combined with a victim pool of individuals with few families or social ties, created a tragically perfect ecosystem for serial violence. Men who had no one to report them missing could disappear for years, with their absence noticed by no one. The operation could have remained a dark, local legend if the McCormicks had not made a critical mistake. They murdered someone who would be missed. The event that triggered a formal investigation began on August 30th, 1983. Bert Donohoe, a 60-year-old semi-truck driver, failed to appear at a truck stop in Wheat Ridge, Colorado for a scheduled meeting with a fellow driver. That same day, he missed a promised call to his wife. Unlike the rumored transient victims, Donohoe's absence was immediately noticed and reported. The Wheat Ridge Police Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation began an investigation into his disappearance and the theft of his Kenworth truck and trailer. For nearly a year, the case had no leads. Then, in July 1984, the missing truck was located in Oregon. Investigators traced its history and discovered it had been purchased at an auction in Arizona. That truck had been sold on consignment from Michael McCormick. Despite this direct link, law enforcement officials had no leads on Donohoe himself and no firm evidence to connect Michael McCormick to his disappearance. The case against Michael was one of theft and fraud, not murder. By 1985, a statewide grand jury was convened in Denver to investigate Michael McCormick's complex criminal schemes, which included theft and fraud. After being indicted, Michael McCormick fled the state and was arrested for jumping bail and extradited from Omaha, Nebraska back to Colorado. He didn't get very far. Michael McCormick was facing a lengthy prison sentence, so he decided to play his only card. He claimed to have knowledge regarding the disappearance and the suspected murder of Donohoe. In January 1986, the prosecution of Michael McCormick executed a formal written plea agreement, a decision that would fatally flaw the state's case. The terms were specific. Michael's obligation was that he had to truthfully, faithfully, and fully provide accurate and verifiable information concerning the Donohoe homicide and any other homicide of which he had knowledge. He was required to assist law enforcement in locating Donohoe's body and had to take and pass a polygraph test unequivocally demonstrating that he had not personally killed any of the victims. In exchange for this truthful cooperation, Michael would serve a period of incarceration of only approximately 2 years for his pending theft and fraud convictions. The state also promised not to charge or prosecute him for any homicide he provided information on, so long as he was not the perpetrator. Michael immediately began to cooperate. He provided a series of detailed statements to investigators. In these statements, he identified the killer, his father, Thomas McCormick. Michael McCormick led investigators to a total of 4 bodies buried on the Eastern Plains Ranch. One was identified as Herbert Donoho. The other 3 were confirmed to be former McCormick Ranch hands. Soon after, Michael passed his polygraph examination. Michael had successfully manipulated the state's investigators. He knew the one piece of evidence they could not find, the body, and he used it as his bargaining chip. The result of Michael's cooperation, Thomas McCormick was arrested for first-degree murder. The investigation into the other 3 murders and the 13 other rumored victims stalled and died. This failure was attributed to budget cuts and jurisdictional problems, the drifter status of the victims. The state's case rested entirely on the testimony of Michael. In March 1986, Thomas Sr. appeared for a preliminary hearing. Michael McCormick took the stand and testified against his father. In response, Thomas Sr.'s defense counsel called several credible witnesses who directly contradicted Michael McCormick on significant points in his testimony. The court was faced with a clear conflict: the word of one compromised self-interest witness in Michael versus that of multiple credible defense witnesses. Despite the contradictions, the trial court found that there was probable cause to proceed with a first-degree murder trial against Thomas McCormick. Michael's testimony alone was weak, but his testimony plus the body he had produced was enough. The physical evidence in the body lent an unearned credibility to the witness who provided it. Even as they prepared for trial against Thomas Sr., prosecutors in the 1st Judicial District continued to have misgivings concerning whether Michael McCormick was telling the truth. They continued to interview him between April and May 1986, and Michael's con began to unravel. His subsequent statements contained a number of blatant inconsistencies regarding critical events. He also admitted that he had withheld information in his earlier statements. Then, Michael made a mistake. In his new conflicting stories, he directly implicated his brother, John McCormick, and also suggested Michael McCormick's estranged wife, Kathy McCormick, was involved in the murder of Donohoe. The compulsive lying was Michael's undoing. By trying to spread the blame too thin to his father, his brother, and his wife, he created a web of conflicts. He made a story so convoluted and contradictory that it became impossible for the prosecution to defend. By late June 1986, the district attorney concluded that Michael had been lying about his involvement in Donohoe's disappearance from the beginning and had materially and substantially breached the plea agreement. The prosecution was forced into a pivot, reaching 2 stark conclusions. Michael is the killer. All the evidence and the irrefutable conflicts in the state stories pointed to Michael McCormick as the murderer of Donohoe. It was also obvious that a murder case against Thomas McCormick could not be proved because Michael McCormick was not a credible witness. On July 9, 1986, the district's attorney's office for the 1st Judicial District formally dismissed all murder charges against Thomas McCormick. On June 9, 1986, the same day the charges against Thomas Sr. were dropped, the state filed an information charging Michael McCormick with the kidnapping and murder of Herbert Donohoe. The legal proceedings against Michael were split into 2 separate trials. The theft case, which was held before a judge, consolidated his newest financial crimes. The court found Michael guilty of 11 felony counts related to theft and fraud. He was sentenced to an aggregate term of 48 years in prison. The murder case was tried before a jury. In 1987, the jury found Michael McCormick guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree kidnapping. Michael was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 22 years for flight and escape charges. These sentences were to run consecutively to the 48-year sentence for his theft convictions. Michael McCormick was never supposed to be a free man ever again. However, Michael appealed his murder condition. His primary legal argument was that the trial court had erred by allowing the prosecution to use the statements he had made pursuant to his plea agreement to impeach his testimony. He argued that these statements were involuntary as a matter of law because they had been induced by the state's promises of leniency. The Colorado Court of Appeals rejected the idea that statements made under a plea deal are inherently involuntary. However, the appellate court found that the trial court had failed to conduct a proper hearing to determine if the statements were involuntary under the totality of the circumstances and remanded the case. The appeal was ultimately successful. Michael's first-degree murder conviction was overturned. Facing the difficult prospect of a new complex trial decades after the crime, the state offered a deal. Michael McCormick pled guilty to a lesser charge of second-degree murder based on what news reports termed evidence discrepancies. He was released from prison around 2005 and having served 18 years in prison. It's an irony that the very deal Michael used to try to frame his father in 1986 became the legal technicality he used to free himself 2 decades later. He created legal and factual chaos that would later be termed evidence discrepancies. It was a masterful web of lies that led to his freedom. After his release, Michael McCormick, who is now 53 years old and going by the name Rex, attempted to build a new life. He became an investor in distressed and rundown properties, forming business relationships with real estate agents. The nature of his business was questionable. One of his partners was Michelle Lee Thompson Lermer, a 38-year-old realtor and mother of a 4-year-old son with whom Michael also had a past romantic relationship. In April 2010, Michael's new life came to a violent end. He kidnapped Thompson Lermer from her home in Parker, Colorado. While being held captive, Thompson Lermer made one frantic monitored phone call to a friend. She managed to say that she was being held against her will and, in a chilling goodbye, told the friend to tell her mother that she loved her and to pick up her son. Police tracked Michael to a home in Granby Ranch. The Granby police and Summit County SWAT team surrounded the residence, but was unable to make contact. Just before 5:30 a.m., as police attempted to break a window to insert a telephone, a single gunshot was heard inside. Both Michael McCormick and Michelle Lee Thompson Lermer were found dead inside. The investigation revealed that Michael had murdered Thompson Lermer a considerable amount of time earlier, and then unalived himself as police closed in. For those who had prosecuted Michael in the 1980s, the final act of violence was no surprise. Retired Denver Deputy District Attorney Bill Buckley, who tried the 1987 murder case, remarked, "I remember it like it was yesterday. He was just cocky and callous. He was quite the charmer with women, but also very much a con artist." This serves as a definitive tragic bookend to Michael's story. You could debate the validity of the 1980s conviction, but what would later happen erases all the doubt. Kidnapping, holding someone hostage, and committing a calculated murder were a mirror image of the crimes for which he was convicted decades earlier. It's a violent, predatory nature that the prosecutors and law enforcement had seen in 1987. The death of Michael McCormick in 2010 put to rest any hope of solving cases of the bodies dug up on the former ranch. The original mystery of the murder farm and its rumored 17 victims remains Colorado's darkest cold case. Tom McCormack Sr., the man publicly associated with the McCormick Murder Farm, was the subject of a massive serial murder investigation in the 1980s. However, the legal case against him collapsed entirely. The crimes that can be proven on public record belong to Michael Rexford McCormick, a convicted murderer, a masterful con artist who manipulated the system to gain his freedom, and a man who, once released, killed again. The final haunting truth is that the crimes of Thomas McCormick Sr. remain suspended between dark rumor and provable fact. Forensic evidence of multiple weapons and 2 shovels strongly implies he was complicit in the horrors that took place on his ranch. However, his son's lies corrupted the investigation so that a murder conviction became impossible. The full truth of the murder farm and the number of men who died there was taken to the grave by both Thomas Sr. in 1997 by his son Michael in 2010. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Please make sure that you like, share, and comment on this video, and hit the hype button. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Blue Sky. My username is The Spooky Lawyer. If there is a spooky or disturbing story you would like me to cover, send me an email. My email address is thespookylawyer@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the channel, there is a link in the description of this video and in my bio to buy me a coffee, so you can buy me a coffee, or you can become a member of this channel. For $1.99, you can get access to exclusive content, including exclusive videos, as well as access to my videos before they are made public. I appreciate you considering this. You also support me by liking, sharing, and continuing to watch my videos. And I do appreciate that you watch my videos. And please stay spooky.